So welcome, everyone. I am Ravi. I'm excited to lead a conversation today about GenAI product strategy. Strategy is incredibly important in this AI space. I think we've all seen over the last 18 months that things have been moving incredibly fast. There's been companies that have started where the space that they started in quickly evaporated as larger companies like OpenAI and Anthropic made changes to their platform. This is all playing out really differently than the internet and mobile. The internet and mobile in the early days, it was kind of a quiet time where startups could have some room to innovate and compete as the bigger players tried to figure out what to do. But today with AI, you've got the large big tech companies, so Microsoft and Google, the major AI platforms, OpenAI and Anthropic, and the big VC firms all investing really heavily. And so competition is fierce. And that means that good strategy is essential to winning in this market. And I'm incredibly excited to have three great panelists today who are going to talk about how they are leading AI strategy at their companies. We're going to talk about strategy from three different perspectives. We're going to talk about it from the user perspective. So how do you use AI to solve for real customer problems? AI is incredibly magical in certain ways, but not all novel experiences are really needed experiences. And so it's incredibly important to think about how do you use AI to solve fundamental customer problems, many of which probably existed before AI was able to solve them. We're going to talk about technology strategy. AI has gotten a lot easier to access. There's publicly available models that are easy to access and use. So that means that you can add impressive AI features to your products very quickly. You don't need to be on the frontier of AI and spend months or years researching. But at the same time, everyone else can access those technologies. And so we're going to talk about how to create a technology strategy that really helps companies build great AI features and differentiate. And then lastly, we'll talk about competitive strategy. So this is a market where lots of people are competing for market share in various different markets. We're going to talk about how to create a defensible position and how to mitigate platform risk. As we all build on these major platforms like OpenAI and Anthropic, we run the risk of competing with the platforms that we are building on. And so we'll talk about ways to mitigate that risk. As we get started, there's kind of two ways to participate. We have a Discord server. So for general chatter and networking, getting to know other people that are in the panel, you can access the Discord. The link should be in the chat. And then we've also got Q&A open. So you can use the Zoom Q&A features to add in questions. We won't have a ton of time for Q&A. We might be able to take one or two as we get into things, but we'll definitely capture Q&A and we'll make sure that the questions that people vote up and are really popular get answered in the future. So with that, I wanted to start with brief introductions, and let's start with Claire. Claire, can you tell us about yourself? And as part of that, can you tell us a magical moment that you've recently had with AI?
Hi, everybody. As you can tell, I'm a little under the weather, but I'm looking forward to this conversation. I am Claire Vo. I'm the Chief Product Officer at LaunchDarkly, a feature management and experimentation platform, leading all of technology, so product engineering, design, data, all those fun teams. And then I am also the founder, or as I like to say, I'm the bot mom of ChatPRD, which is an AI co-pilot for product work. I used to say for product managers, but actually a lot of people that are not product managers use ChatPRD. And what is my magic moment with AI? I mean, honestly, it has been the last 6 months of building ChatPRD with no one but me, myself, and AI. And so it's been pretty incredible as a previous founder and somebody who has run large product and engineering organizations to see how much is possible to do with co-pilots and other technologies. It was just something that's not available to me the last time I started a startup, which was 10 years ago. So that has been the magic moment for me.
What tools have you found most helpful for building?
I mean, like GitHub Copilot, Cursor is great. Like ChatPRD, of course. Just like the basics, the good ones.
Yeah.
The kind of generalists or general specialists have been the best.
Nice. Awesome. Welcome. Darius, we'd love to learn more about you and what's a magical moment you've had with AI.
Yeah, so I'm Darius. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Otter.ai. where we like join your meetings, record them, transcribe them, summarize them, make them all like searchable and Gen AIable. It's kind of like, meeting Gen AI. And so I've had a long career in like social and then B2B SaaS, and I really enjoy like building software that just brings people immediate value, especially in the business setting. And AI is just a fantastic way to do that. With like very little input, you can get a tremendous amount of, not perfect, but like very high quality, very useful business output. And my magic moment, obviously I love using Otter. It's great to like have it record all my meetings and have them searchable, etc. But like the full value of it didn't actually come back to me until recently when I had to like transfer a project to a new person. And this person was really on their game. They're like, okay, I've got these like 10 questions for you about the project. And every question I literally just pasted into Otter, and I had Otter actually run the question,
Great.
and then we get the answer and I paste it back in Slack. And it's like, hey, are you just like copying these answers from Otter because all the answers are there? I'm like, yes, all my knowledge is actually in Otter. And then we actually just share all the meetings in a channel with you, and you can ask the questions yourself. And I realize that now with AI, I can do knowledge transfer without actually it being from my brain to his, but from my kind of data repositories and AI repositories to theirs.
Yeah, I think there's been this holy grail of corporate knowledge management that a lot of companies have tried to solve. And now for the first time, there's actually a really interesting and powerful interface to be able to access all of that. And excited to talk more about what Otter is doing in that space. And Jeffrey, would love to hear more about you and a magical moment that you've had with AI.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. Hey, everyone. Excited to be here. I'm Jeffrey. I'm one of the co-founders and chief architect at Amplitude. Hopefully, many of you use or at least have heard of Amplitude. We're a digital analytics platform that helps companies build better products. So we do everything from product and web analytics to A/B testing and feature flagging to customer data platform, session replay. The list goes on. So check us out if you haven't already. I am an infrastructure engineer by background. I've been working on Amplitude for the last 10 years, but the last couple, I have spent a lot on thinking through AI and our product and technology strategy around that. I did AI way back in college, almost 15 years ago now, and so kind of rekindling a little bit of that
Nice.
to help us figure out what to do here. In terms of magical moment, it's less one moment and more. I'll throw another bone out for GitHub Copilot. I found that it's a lot like, as an engineer learning to use, or getting to use an IDE for the first time and having autocomplete. And that's actually mind blowing if you wrote code without autocomplete before. But now GitHub Copilot is kind of the next level of that. And I found that as I'm writing code, I've developed the intuition for when GitHub Copilot is going to work and when it's not. And so like I'll try to write something and be like, okay, Copilot should be able to fill this out. And I think my hit rate's probably like 70% on that right now. But yeah, it kind of becomes a part of my my coding process, and it's very, very impressive. It's something I definitely wouldn't have imagined a couple of years back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got this kind of telepathic element to it. I've been trying to get better at my front end skills and working with JavaScript, but trying to learn TypeScript as well. And so just
Same,
having
man. Same.
Copilot
I'm
to
an
be able
infrastructure
to,
engineer, so like JavaScript, I don't know what's going on. Copilot is huge.
yeah, it makes such a difference. And then it can convert the JavaScript into pretty good TypeScript, so you don't have to constantly look everything up. So really magical. Awesome. So I am Ravi. I am a product advisor. I'm also currently the CPO at a health tech company called Sesame. I've worked with Reforge over the past few years, helped with the product leadership program, the product strategy program, and then launched a program called Leading Product Teams last fall. So excited to be with everyone today. My magical moment has been, I really enjoy writing, but I haven't necessarily found that AI has been that helpful. And recently I was working on a post and I used a combination of tools that I found worked really well. So I used Otter for the transcription, and then I used ChatGPT to turn that into an outline for a blog post. And then interestingly, to get a near final output, I used Claude to turn that outline into something that sounded a lot like what I would write. It was a thread that I had built to help Claude kind of understand how I like to write, the types of language I like to use. And the output was pretty close. I spent about half an hour afterwards just editing it. And that combination of transcript to outline to first draft worked really well. And so it was interesting for me to see that AI is continuously improving and getting better at some of the hardest tasks, and that you can use these tools together to chain them to get output that is hard to do in any one tool alone. So before we get into the discussion, I wanted to talk about a couple of points on why strategy is so critical to winning with AI. And like we talked about earlier, past technology shifts, whether it was the internet or mobile, they created a lot of greenfield opportunity. And so big companies move slowly, and startups had this window of opportunity within which to build. But that hasn't been the case with AI. And why is that? Why is that the case? Why is AI playing out so differently? I think one of the ways to think about this is AI is really an accelerating technology that can help incumbents as much as it can help startups, rather than a disruptive technology. The internet and mobile required big companies to rethink and rebuild their products to take advantage of those technologies. But AI is relatively straightforward to integrate into existing products and can often make those products significantly better, as we will talk about today. And so as a result, it's led to a very different competitive environment. And I think one of the best examples of this is Adobe. Adobe was a little bit slower to move into really embracing cloud technology and cloud-based collaboration into their products, and that created a window of opportunity for Canva and for Figma. But it's been very different with AI. They have quickly added AI into the entire Adobe Creative Suite, as well as launched AI-centric products. And so as a result, what seemed like was going to be a really interesting open space opportunity for design tools has quickly turned into a pretty competitive environment where Adobe is competing really fiercely. They're seeing that benefit in terms of adoption. They're seeing that in terms of their stock price as well. So it's important to think strategically about the products you're building and how to compete effectively. And we're going to talk about that in terms of three strategic questions. One is the user strategy question, which is how can AI be used to solve real customer problems? The second is the tech strategy question, which is what is the right approach to building your product's AI capabilities? When can you use commonly available models? And when do you really need to push the frontier of technology? And then we're going to talk about competitive strategy. How can you create a competitive, defensible position and avoid getting disrupted by other competitors or getting disrupted by the platforms that you might be relying on? And so to get started, let's jump into talking about user strategy and this idea of finding AI market fit. So, it's not necessarily the case that just because there's new technology, it's going to work well for your customers. And let's start with Jeffrey. So Jeffrey, Amplitude has always been at the forefront of helping companies innovate their products via data. How is Amplitude using AI to help companies do that more efficiently and more effectively?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that we kind of put forth when AI became, a really hot topic was like, does this impact where we're going long term with Amplitude? And for us, the answer was pretty clearly no. We've always been about automating the processes, the manual, painful processes that go into building great products, like collecting feedback, understanding what users are actually doing, synthesizing that, and learning from it. And since the very beginning, 10 years back, we always knew that AI would evolve over time and become better and help kind of accelerate, to your point, each of these processes. And so, for us, it's great because AI just makes it easier to do all of the things that we wanted to help customers solve to begin with. And so it's really helped us kind of move that forward. To give like a couple of examples, the traditional one when it comes to analytics is, okay, it's hard to build analyses. It's hard to understand your schema, to understand all of the different ways to formulate, metrics and compute them and all of that. And generative AI has been the first time where it's like, okay, we can actually make that easier. And that was the first idea that popped into everyone's mind. It's like, oh, you can have it write SQL for you. You can have it, write all these Python scripts and do analysis. And there's some pretty impressive demos. But as I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the course of this conversation, it's harder than it sounds to get that right. But for us, the strategy is kind of the same as it was before. We want to help customers build better products, and AI is very much an accelerating function for that. And so it's a tool for us. It's a tool for us to make things a lot easier to use.
What are some of the ways that you're surfacing AI capabilities within the product?
Yeah, so there's this kind of thing where AI is really good at helping handle kind of like ambiguous or flexible workflows. And so, we have a product called Ask Amplitude that basically is that. It's like when you land in Amplitude, maybe you don't know exactly how to formulate, the question you have in mind, or you don't know how it maps to your schema or how other people in your organization um, answer that question. And it's hard to kind of find necessarily. Like search is an okay tool, like browsing around, and playing around with Amplitude is fine, but it takes time. And a lot of people don't have time. And so exposing like a natural language interface to express intent, I think will be one of the most powerful use cases of generative AI. And that's what we've done with Ask Amplitude as well.
Nice. Darius, let's talk a little bit about Otter. I think, Amplitude is a company that has added AI that was a company prior to, the Gen AI trend that we're seeing today. And Otter is one that is really an AI native company. So how is Otter transforming how people capture and utilize the information that they create in meetings?
Yeah, I mean, Otter has been doing AI since the start of the company about 7, 8 years ago. And, it really started as a transcription company. And so really it turned speech into text. And, at the time that was cutting edge and it was like, very hard. There weren't like off-the-shelf libraries to do it. So we did almost all of it in-house. There were a few open source things that we, got to start on. And then since then, like the AI, train has kind of like, has kind of come, and that's been more intense with the LLMs, et cetera, et cetera. And so really like we think of our business as taking things that were in many cases like impossible to do before, and now AI makes them possible. And so really trying to bring things into the realm of like, things that were just only human doable, like taking notes from a meeting, are now something where AI can do it. And then taking just from those like raw notes into like a meaningful summary and then action items is then something that previously only a human could do. And now from there, summarizing multiple meetings and being able to like gather insights across them was again something only a human could do. And now like Otter.ai does it for you. For instance, we have automatically with Autopilot for sales, we make a directory of all your sales calls, and then you can query that particular directory or channel rather, and you can say, hey, what are customers asking for in the last 60 days, or how many customers or which customers have been asking for this particular feature, and you can find those customers and reach out to them. And so, or you could say, what are the top 10 things that the product is missing, or the top 10 languages that people want added. And so all these different things, it can like aggregate from many conversations and get you that same insight that previously you pretty much say, hey, human, please go do this for a few hours and get back to me with that insight. And so that's really exciting. Now, one of the challenges is the AI isn't perfect, and it doesn't, understand intent and nuance, obviously, as well as a human, especially a human who's been kind of fine-tuned into your business and educated on exactly what you're talking about when you give them that ask. And so, part of it is like carefully constructing exactly what you're asking for, thinking about how you ask the question. For instance, one thing the AI isn't great at right now is if you say, hey, what was the best feedback we got? It's a little bit unclear on like, what does best mean? If you say, hey, give it some examples, or you say, well, what are some, other things specifically, it can actually get you like better examples, especially if there's keyword matching that it can use to do the initial search. It's a lot better. So there is still a little bit like doing Google search now, or even 10 years ago. If you know how to do it, you can get a tremendous amount from it. But then part of the challenge is that not every consumer or enterprise customer knows how to do it yet. And so, part of the AI market fit, and I think we're all seeing this, is what things can the AI do out of the box without anyone, being smart and using it? That's really amazing. You just do it and it works. And then what things are kind of on the edge, if you know how to use it, is amazing. And then what things are a little bit beyond that pale right now. Like getting absolutely perfect answers to every question is a little hard for the AI right now. So I think it's really great at like doing large amounts of textual work and also getting you like a pretty darn good draft and then letting the user go with it. That's a little bit where I think the market is right now. And I'm really excited for it to level up more and more where you really trust the AI, increasing amounts going forward.
How are you finding that trust is playing out with users? Do users get the idea that, AI is probabilistic and you won't always get the answer that you want, or that you may need to integrate it or engage with it in a different way? Or is that something that's sort of inherently frustrating for users?
I think it's the kind of thing where, like we were talking about earlier with GitHub Copilot, you kind of get a stronger and stronger gut feel as to what it can do and what it can't do. For instance, you might ask it a question, and very often it'll give you an answer, or maybe half the answer or three quarters. You're like, oh yeah, like I could have thought of that. And then maybe part of the answer, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about one or two of those elements. And so it's really good that the AI like brought it up for me and reminded me. And so you're like, actually, it's adding to what I would even draft. And then you also think to yourself, oh, maybe there's one or two things that's missing or it's not emphasizing the way I would emphasize. One thing Otter does is we give you the references. And so if you're like, oh, is that really true? Or is that, did they say it in that way? You can click in and then either read the local summary of the meeting or listen to the transcript and hear exactly what people said. And so you can kind of like fact check yourself. And eventually you get kind of a pretty good gut feel as to like what it gets right and what it doesn't get right. I think it's really good at getting like broad swaths of what people are thinking about or pulling out individual pieces of information and aggregate them. It's less good at making like kind of like a reasoned judgment about things. Like if you're like, strategically, where should I take my business? Like you're hiring like a McKinsey consultant. It might have some like off the shelf ideas for you, but it's not necessarily going to do a perfect aggregation and kind of like a decidedly strategic direction for you. It surprisingly works well. Say, what should we plan for Q3? It'll actually go and find things that people were talking about and actually find times when people said Q3 and aggregate like a pretty passable plan. So it is really getting there. But you have to know that it's really like a starting place. It gets you to second or third base. It doesn't get you to home base, I think, most times right now.
Yeah, it's a little bit like working with a person in the sense that if you provide some context and some coaching, it can, generally solve the problem pretty well. But without that context, the initial work is a little bit, sometimes random in terms of the quality. Claire, you decided to start ChatPRD. What was the user problem that you saw with existing tools, and why did you decide to start it?
Oh, I mean, the user problem is I have too much work to do and not enough time. So user of one. The problem with the existing tools is none of them, I'm one of those people in tech that have one of those liberal arts degrees they tell everybody to get. And I just have a very high bar for writing. And existing tools and existing models are just pretty terrible still at writing. Like I even know Claude 3.5 came out. It's not me, right? It doesn't sound like me. It doesn't have the right tone. It doesn't structure things the way that I structure them as a product thinker. And so kind of the problem that I was forced with solving is I had a lot of hard work, product output to generate and needed to accelerate, to that 80-90% mark so that I could spend the very precious time I have between meetings going deep and making it great.
And what have you found has been critical to get it to close that gap? So how is ChatPRD closing that gap versus
she is but a prompt, but she's mine. So no, I actually do think prompting matters. Like it really does. We've done side by side. Other people, third parties have done side by side. And the reality is we're outputting higher quality structured outputs for particular use case based on telling the model what to do. In addition, I do think context really matters. Additional context really matters. And so, existing tools can have knowledge and memory and all those things, but at the end of the day, they're, it really requires the end user to figure out how they want to structure the inputs into that system in order to get the outputs that they want. And I think this is where these specialized tools really can shine, is it can create personalized context for very specific use cases and outcompete on outputs.
And prompting is one of these things where it's kind of hard to understand exactly how it works. How have you gotten better at prompting, and how have you integrated those learnings into the product?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this shift into AI as a foundational technology is when I first started product management over 20 years ago, I joked that I was really good at it because at the end of the day, all a digital product is words on a screen that instruct a user to get from path A to path B. And your job as a product manager is to inhabit that user and use basically words or be able to describe a visual by words to somebody who can put it on an internet website to get from point A to point B. And so I always found that I started my first job in tech was as a copywriter. So I always found that my ability to use English as a programming language was something that I honed over the last 2 decades. And now that is becoming even more useful and even more critical, which is now I think of the English language as a programming language, just like I think of TypeScript and JavaScript and Python and all those things. And so to get good at structuring English inputs into these systems that take natural language as their input is actually really important. So learn how to write in structured ways, learn how to write cleanly. It's going to be a really valuable skill moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoy Ethan Mollick has a Substack called One Useful Thing, and he talks a lot about prompting And one of his insights is that managers actually make really good prompt engineers versus ICs because they're used to using English as a programming language. They're used to working with people through their words. And as a result, they get into more of a mentoring and coaching sort of mindset with these models, and that helps them unlock some of the capabilities that are latent in the model. Let's talk a little bit more about that. I think one of the interesting things with AI is that we're all learning what it's capable of together. Even the companies that have built the large models are learning what they are and are not capable of. And so we need this kind of new language of human AI interaction. Darius, you talked about this a little bit, but like in Otter, what steps is Otter taking to educate users on how to best leverage Otter's AI capabilities, as well as the vast repository of information that they're creating by transcribing meeting notes?
Yeah, well, it is a complex new skill in some ways, although we try to make it as easy as possible. And so we have like the usual onboarding where we'll encourage you to like, link your calendar. And so we can grab your meetings and then encourage like you to enable Otter to like join and share the meeting. That way it joins, records, summarizes, sends the summary out, kind of does your meeting notes for you. And so that way you don't have to worry about action items or like who said what. It's all there for everyone, all their participants. So we try to make it as like automatic as possible, just like set and forget. On the querying side though, when you click back to see a conversation, we have very prominently in the sidebar, hey, you can ask questions about this. And one thing we do to make it a little more personal is we run AI on the transcript and summary itself to get suggested questions. So for instance, if we ordered this, I hope we are recording this with something, and then we would.
We are, yeah.
Yeah, but then we'd be able, it would say something like, oh yeah, like, what did they say about ChatPRD? How did that work? Or what did Jeffrey say about, Amplitude's approach to AI? And you just click that, and then it would ask that question and get you that summary. And then when you see that, you're like, oh, I guess I could ask any question I want and also get a similar summary. So we try to a little bit kind of give you training wheels and like help you do it in like as much as possible user specific way. Because I think with some of this AI, if you just give them the high level, like, oh, you can ask any question about anything. With ChatGPT, that works because it is kind of a global system. But with a lot of these other systems, you really only care for your data. Like you really want to probably see chat, PRD with your own PRD, and then you're like, this is amazing. Whereas you see maybe with global data, it doesn't hit hard as much. And so we really try to onboard people even with their own data. Like we do actually onboarding on a speech shared to you if we can. And if there isn't any onboarding for that, we have a sample speech where you could just see how someone actually uses Otter and kind of try before you buy, before you set it all up yourself.
One of the things that you mentioned when we were talking about this is that Otter is actually integrated the help documentation into the information for the AI chat assistant. Can you talk a little bit about why you did that? What was the insight and how that's impacted users?
Yeah, also apologies for my voice. I'm still like recovering from something. So yeah, what we found is that we have like Otter.ai chat across the whole site. And so you just click it, go in and ask any question you want of all of your meeting history. And so it's really handy for the stuff I talked about earlier, aggregating data, et cetera. However, we were seeing people simply type in, hey, how do I upgrade? Or how do I share? Or like other different kind of more like help questions. And then we realized what we could do is we could actually identify those questions and then suck in all of our help center data and just give you an AI response to those questions. And so now when we identify something that we could answer or seems to be very Otter account specific, we just give you that answer in line and then link to the help article. And so that's like another general thing about AI, I think, is that we have our own ideas about how it works and how users should use it. But oftentimes they really do it their own way, right? Like, we might expect them to type a question and they actually just type a search term like keywords. And so, just looking at that user data and looking also, we have like thumbs up, thumbs down on nearly every AI generated part of the site. And then we watch that really closely. Like internally, if you do a thumbs up, I'm sorry, a thumbs down, it actually goes to our team. When I say internally, just for people who work at Otter. And then our team could say, oh, what did Darius say? Why was this a thumbs down? And we really try to figure it out. And in general, we look at the thumbs up and thumbs down to figure out if a new algorithm that we just launched actually is getting more positive feedback. And so we look very closely because this is a bit of a stochastic black box. And as we make tweaks, it's unclear sometimes whether we've helped one or hurt the other until we get that user feedback to really validate that, yes, people in general are getting a better experience. And so going in and seeing like some of these specific cases, like Otter searches or like keyword searches, we can go in and say, okay, let's tune the system just for that and get our overall approval rating higher.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that feedback loop is so important. And it's been an important part of both OpenAI, Anthropic, and others actually getting their models to perform better. It's using that human feedback. Jeffrey, one of the things I've noticed about Amplitude is it not only is a great product analytics tool, but also helps me be a better product analyst. How are you using AI to help with that? And how are you using AI to help people understand how to get insights from their data?
Yeah, that's great. So I kind of want to start with echoing one of Darius's points around if you give people a text box, they're going to put some interesting stuff in there. It's really, really helpful to look at it. And so, when we put it, we have a text box that's like, hey, you can ask any question about your data. And one of the very common questions we saw was, what is my API key to instrument Amplitude with? And it's like, okay, well, it didn't know how to answer that because it's trying to, turn it into a chart. But it's kind of the same ideas. And so the next iteration of Ask Amplitude, which is coming very shortly, actually, will be a lot more diverse in its capabilities. So being able to handle requests like that, hooking up to the help documentation the same way that Darius mentioned, because like those are the types of things that people want in the context of Amplitude. And so I think the kind of a new framing, a conversational framing, gives you a lot more opportunity to both connect to a lot of different tools, as well as educate and teach. And so I think we've all seen the pattern in stuff like ChatGPT or Perplexity of like suggestions on like the next question, the follow-ups that you want to ask. And I think that's actually, in my mind, we spent like many decades designing like these nicely crafted UXs to accomplish all these different tasks. But one of the big limitations of those is that it's kind of hard to create these dynamic workflows based on context. Because you can't just, you can't stuff every possible workflow in every possible state of your UX. But within a chat, you actually have, you have the context of the chat, and then the suggestions are kind of this very, very dynamic location to help the user progress whatever they're trying to do. And so whether it's the next analysis or, finding other content in Amplitude that's related to what you're talking about, or, answering some question from the documentation, like that pattern I find very, very powerful for educating users.
Awesome. And one of the things that we talked about is ultimately the vision of Amplitude is to enable products to improve themselves. And so what are some things that you're doing there to help users understand how to take that sort of approach towards product development?
Definitely. Yeah, we're very excited about a future where products can get better without us spending as much time on them. And so far we've talked mostly about, hey, how do you help people do analysis better, which is a really important part to do that, right? You have to learn from your data and figure out what the next step is. But then, if you think about the loop of product development, we usually talk about, build, deploy, measure, and learn. The build and deploy parts are, for most of Amplitude's history, I think kind of outside of our domain, right? We're focusing on the analytics. But since we launched, A/B testing and feature flagging a couple of years back, it's kind of, now in the purview a little bit. And one of the things we're really excited to launch also in a couple of months is generative experimentation. And so, we've kind of seen what ChatGPT and LLMs in general can do around producing content, whether it's text or images or even code. And the big limitation then is, how do you know if what's produced is good? And I'm sure Claire could talk about this more as well, but like the way you know if it's good is you test it. You test it with users, and you see how it performs and see how users respond to it. And so if you think about kind of hooking those two things up together, right, you create a bunch of variations of your product with different text, images, code, colors, layouts, whatever it might be, and then you test it, you kind of have this self-improving cycle of, continuously finding, ways that your product can get better. And so we're really excited to test that out and kind of make that the way that products get better in general in the future. And if you think about, a lot of people might get a little bit squeamish at the idea at first, because like, oh, my product's gonna, start changing without my input. One, obviously, you'll have control of it, but I think the big opportunity here is not to improve that core sign-up workflow that everybody on your team is always thinking about all the time. Like, it's gonna be a long time before AI is good at that. But what about that particular section on your admin page that doesn't get the love that it probably should and makes that one user really, really frustrated all the time? Like maybe you could make the product better for them automatically, and help more aspects of your product become refined in a way that you can't really today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we already see that self-improving nature in content algorithms, like the algorithm for TikTok, Tinder's recommendation algorithm, YouTube's recommendation algorithm. Claire, I'm curious for LaunchDarkly, how are you approaching helping users use AI to experiment and to improve their products?
Yeah, I think what's nice about LaunchDarkly and our applications or use cases for generative AI is of the things, it might be because it was built by these folks and so it is biased towards being good at these things, but we've all said it's pretty serviceable at writing code. And LaunchDarkly's customers are software engineers. And so the thing that some of these generative AI models are best at are well suited to solve what I would say are just friction challenges in the developer experience. And so we really focus on integrating generative AI capabilities inside, actually not even necessarily inside LaunchDarkly, but in the LaunchDarkly ecosystem of experience to just take annoying things off core workflows. So whether that is writing a feature flag through our integration with GitHub Copilot or automatically issuing PRs for cleanup for feature flags when they're stale and ready to go, it's really about like, how can we write these micro bits of code that can be checked by and approved by a human software engineer, but that just streamlines things. And we actually do that almost entirely out of the LaunchDarkly web app, because again, we are serving software engineers and they spend way more time in their IDE than they do in Chrome if they're lucky. And so we're really focused on DevX, but we've really thought about the different surface areas we can optimize against. And it's been great to see that it's a natural fit for our users and how they're operating every day.
Given that developers are spending so much time in their IDE, how do you focus on building awareness of those features and helping them adopt those features as they come online?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's super interesting, just generally as a DevTools product to let, because people think that our product is a SaaS platform, but it's really a DevTools platform. And so I don't think it's any different than any of our other sort of ancillary supporting products, like our command line interface, our IDE integrations. It's really about like classic product and customer marketing, where it's, hey, these things are available. And then what's nice is IDE plugins, GitHub Copilot, like most software engineers are ramped on the user experience of those platforms. So once they know that the product exists, it's pretty intuitive on how to actually use it.
Great. Nice. Let's shift and talk about tech strategy. I think one of the really interesting things that companies need to figure out is where to use commonly available tools and where to really push on frontier technology to do things that aren't possible with AI today. Claire, let's start with you. When you started ChatPRD, how did you think about what AI models you wanted to use, what tools you wanted to build with?
Yeah, so for me, it's generally like what works fastest with sufficient quality and then focused on the user experience. To me, the differentiating capability is not what model are we using under the hood. It is, are we building a differentiated, highly valuable user experience and solving, as one of the people in QA said, like solving a very important problem. And so I spend most of my mind space thinking about, am I solving the right problem? Am I thinking about product managers? Do I know how their workflow works? Do I know what they need? And spend very much less time thinking, do I want to debate this model versus that model for like some micro immeasurable improvement in subjective quality? And so for me, like these are my decisions. Is it easy to implement? Does it meet the needs of my user experience, my users? Does it have capabilities? And then is it of sufficient quality that customers use it and don't complain? And then is it fast? I think speed is actually like the killer feature in a lot of these things, because latency, I think, is one of the most frustrating parts. Like if generation is the magical part, latency is the frustrating part of building these AI products. And so my perspective is these commercial models are really great for most use cases. I have for ChatPRD squarely landed on using OpenAI's commercial models, specifically because they are fast and they are actually the most feature rich. And that's one of the things that you've got to think about when you're implementing more complex generative AI products is that in an ideal world, you'd be able to test and tune between models. But the reality, these commercial providers don't all have feature parity across all their capabilities. So you got to spend a lot of time actually thinking about the architecture if you want to switch or test between models of, if I do it this way with OpenAI, can I actually do it that way with Anthropic models, or do I have to architect an entirely different kind of workflow? So I'm very happy with the commercial models we use, and more importantly, like my customers are happy. But definitely matters, and at the end of the day, all that matters is customer satisfaction and utility.
Absolutely. Did you do you use 3.5 sometimes and use 4 and 4.5 other times to solve for latency?
I used to, but 4 was like cheap and fast and good. And so I used to have a couple like micro tasks that were split off. And at the end of the day, like my margins are fine. It is not like it's not worth it. So I would rather have like a consistent implementation across almost everything. And then optimizations for someone else to worry about.
Awesome. Darius, so Otter has an interesting strategy where you're using frontier tech developed internally for certain things. You're using available models for other things. Can you tell us a little bit more about the tech strategy behind Otter and where you choose to use one approach versus another?
Yeah, so Otter started by building like AI tech itself, like really starting on like speech to text, and then like text into kind of summaries and that kind of stuff. The other thing that we do that's different than a lot of other companies is we don't just turn the speech into text. We also do speaker ID. So we figure out actually who is speaking based on their voice tones, the Zoom, manual assignment of previous speeches, like a number of different factors come together to say, oh, that's Darius, that's Ravi on this particular call. Which also means that even when you're on your phone, we go to coffee shop, hit record, and you're like, oh, that's Darius, that's Ravi. So that's really handy because some of our competitors will actually just say like, conference room says this, conference room also said this, because all they have is like, what they're joining Zoom with. So those kind of lower level models like the ASR, automated speech recognition, and then also the speaker ID model, we really see as fundamental to our business. And we really like to be on the cutting edge of that, the absolute best models and the best tune for our kind of meeting environment. Then there's other models like, with like LLMs. We don't currently have $10 billion to spend training an LLM. And so, kind of standing on the shoulders of giants there makes a lot of sense. That being said, there's some like sub parts of it, like how we recognize exactly what someone's prompting in this particular case, or how we like recognize like a given meeting context where we actually have built a number of our own models under the hood. So it's really like this hybridization of a number of different models. And I think as you go farther and farther forward, the main models will just do a tremendous amount of stuff, but there will be like for any great application, there'll be all these specific things that the application has to tune with its own local data to really get crisp on that. And a lot of that is going to be deciding which model to route to, of like, hey, do you go to the big LLM for this? Maybe which big LLM to use, and then also which internal house model do you use, or when you use open source, because open source also has the advantage of like it's configurable. You can set it up in your own environment. There's a number of different kind of like, especially technical applications of open source that are really valuable. And also all of these things you can fine tune, with your own data set. So it's really this combination of like what works best in each case. And maybe we come at it a little bit more from an engineering mindset of like, let's actually build the most cutting edge technology and tooling in certain cases, and then see what's even possible. Like really try to be on that cutting edge. Not even necessarily knowing to start with like what the user need is, but have the cutting edge technology, have the deep user needs, and really figure out like where those zipper together, like at the forefront of innovation, like every month, every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on something really important, which is this kind of trade-off between speed to market and long-term defensibility. And for certain companies, that frontier research is important. For other companies, being able to use commonly available models is the right thing to get a product into market quickly. Jeffrey, Amplitude takes a different approach than Otter in the sense that there's not a lot of frontier research that you're doing right now. In fact, you had done some experimentation with fine-tuning OpenAI's models and decided to pull back from that and use the models that are available off the shelf. Can you talk about Amplitude's approach from a tech strategy standpoint around this, and what you've learned about sort of the best way to deliver these capabilities to your customers?
Definitely. Yeah, I'll echo a lot of Claire's comments around just getting a product out quickly and being able to test a lot of variations and being able to find, the product market fit of your product. Like that's by far the biggest risk when you build these, and the model behind it is kind of secondary to that. And so, yeah, we built out this, kind of natural language to Amplitude chart model, which is, a combination of a bunch of prompts kind of stitched together. And from a cost and latency perspective, we were kind of thinking, oh, maybe if we fine-tuned, some of these different prompts, we could get this better, better latency in particular was what we were hoping for. Because if you use, 3.5 back in the day, fine-tuned versus GPT-4, it would actually be a pretty big difference in latency. But when we did that, as it turned out, it ended up being a lot worse on the OpenAI side because we, when you're asking for a fine-tuned model, that is a custom thing that OpenAI has to load for you as a customer versus the global models that are loaded for everybody kind of all at the same time. And we actually found that it was much less reliable on the OpenAI side. This is quite a tactical thing, but they clearly weren't really ready to serve fine-tuned models on a low latency basis because presumably if someone stops using it, it just gets cycled out of memory or whatever. And then if the OpenAI progressed a bunch, and then with 4.0 you kind of have the good balance of both latency and intelligence. And so then the trade-off becomes like even less. It makes even less sense to try to do really custom stuff, and it's better to use kind of these very powerful out of the box models for the use cases we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes to Claire's point as well about latency being really key. Once
Definitely.
users have to wait a certain amount, they start to engage with the AI differently. So we have just a couple minutes left. I thought we'd quickly touch on competitive strategy. Right now, there's a lot of players within this space. There's players that are creating models. There's players that are using models. There's players in every different domain vertical. And so as companies think about how to compete and win in this space, they need to do that in the context of all of this competitive activity. So I'll open it up to all of you. How are you thinking about this? How are you thinking about competing with other people that are doing similar things, as well as mitigating the risk of depending on some of these larger platforms?
Yeah, I can talk about platform risk, which, one of the reasons why I joined LaunchDarkly at the beginning of this year is LaunchDarkly is a risk management control plane for software engineers. It is a, configuration rollout tool. And so a lot of what our customers are pulling us into is abstracting away their implementation of these models and giving them the sort of on-demand ability to switch, tune, scale up, scale down, different implementations. So I do think there's solutions here to be built, and we're certainly building more and more of them. I would worry, less about platform risk and more about where value creation is going to exist. I think a lot of things, we're all worried a lot of things are going to become commoditized, including our own jobs. And so I just anchor on like, what is a problem I can solve better than anybody else? How can I create a delightful experience? How can I create an experience that's high margin, that there's commercial value for it? Like, doesn't matter what's under the hood if you can do those things well. And so I think not getting distracted by competition right now and really executing in your core problem space is probably the best advice I can give folks. And platform risk, I really don't think is going to be a real thing. There are plenty of companies out there that have built on top platforms that have tried to go after their own markets and have failed. So I think there's less risk there than we presume.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think the most defensible thing is not the technology. It's actually a happy customer that gets their needs met through your product. And once they do, there's pretty high switching costs. People like to stick with things that are working
brand
with them. Absolutely. Yeah. And for that reason, like solving for the customer, putting them first is the most important thing versus potentially getting derailed with thinking about how to push the frontier of the technology if it's not solving a clear pain point. So we're just about at time. That went by really fast. I wanted to just recap on a couple of important takeaways. So like we said, focus on customer pain points first, not the novelty of the technology. Help users really understand how to use the technology in a way that solves their problem. A good tech strategy doesn't necessarily need to be one where you own the model, you're pushing the frontier. You can balance this idea of speed and defensibility. Valuable features are built on what your customers need, not what the technology is capable of. And the last thing that we touched on in a few different areas is leverage proprietary data. So data is often the differentiator rather than the model. Proprietary data can go into training the model. It can go into the prompts and the output from the model. And so that's a fantastic way to solve customer problems and create defensibility. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Darius. Thank you, Jeffrey, for a fascinating conversation. As we talked about, strategy is more critical than ever in this AI age where things are highly competitive. And so I hope everyone has some ideas that they can take away for their own products today. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. Really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for all the great Q&A. It looks like a bunch of questions got answered. And we'll do some follow-up after this. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks all.
Thanks.